male bovine excrement on that one. They're not close. They are still miles apart. But this is all a charade. The United States is still trying to provoke Iran into an expanded attack. We saw that yesterday with what happened. Iran stopped a tanker, U.S. tanker, that was traveling with its transponder turned off. And Iran basically, I don't know if they fired on it or not. They may have. Then in response to that, the United States launched two planes that carried out a strike. Apparently, they just blew up some desert. But in retaliation for that, Iran fired one missile at the airbase in Kuwait where that plane originated, or those two planes originated from. So, everyone's going through sort of a kabuki theater dance right now, stylized, ritualistic, without any real substance to it. I think the initial reaction last night among many pundits and podcasters was, "Oh my God, the war started again." But I kept monitoring the various channels, and it hasn't started again. So it looks like the United States has deliberately backed off, at least for now. And I was told that by somebody who's involved on the air operations side of the house that U.S. is just basically trying to bait Iran into overreacting, and Iran so far doesn't seem willing to take the bait.
One of the things I saw recently, I was looking online, Scott Besson, we have gotten the Iranians to perhaps commit to not having a nuclear program, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, nuclear weapon, nuclear program every other day. And it's like, well, we've gotten the fish to commit that they'll swim from now on. Well, that's just what they do. So you take something that the Iranians have said, this whole business about Iranian nuclear program is farcical in that the U.S. intelligence agency said they don't have one. And they're going to say, okay, that thing that they said they don't want, that there's no evidence that they had, that our own intelligence agency says they don't have. Yeah, we're going to get them to commit that they don't want it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I've maintained all along the entire focus on enriched uranium and Iran's quest for a nuclear weapon. It's all just a red herring. It's a distraction, or it's an excuse. We're looking for a reason to justify attacking Iran, and that has been our reason. But I guarantee you that if Iran turned around and said, no, we're not going to have a nuke, and we've gotten rid of our enriched uranium, we still would not be satisfied. And we've seen this play out before in the region. You remember back in the day when we were demanding that Saddam Hussein get rid of his weapons of mass destruction. And then it turns out who provided him with those weapons of mass destruction, both chemical agents, mustard, nerve gas, and a biological agent? That was us. So we're demanding that he find what we gave him. It's so ludicrous. If this was written up in a movie, they wouldn't believe it. They said that's absurd. Nobody would do that. We did that. So I think Iran's made its positions very clear. It wants immediate sanction relief. It wants immediate assets unfrozen. It wants the war, Israel, to stop attacking the Lebanese and Palestinians, and it's going to control the flow of goods through the Strait of Hormuz. The Besson was saying, "Oh no, Iran's first got allowed just free traffic. You can't charge a fee, nothing, and then we'll consider lifting sanctions." No, that's not how this works. So that's why I say this is an agreement that's going nowhere.
Yeah. And even if they get some, actually, all I read from it was an additional 60 days on something that's already doesn't have an end, just like you said. So you don't need that 60 days. And during that 60 days, we'll continue to talk. That's all I read. And here's the thing. It's hollow, and they can't even get that signed.
Yeah. Well, Trump's got to consider it. Yeah, that's code word for he doesn't read, so he's not going to read it, and this means they'll be back to the drawing board. This has been a Chinese effort using Pakistan as the front guy, and China, I think, is fairly confident that they've got the Gulf Arabs lined up, but the two wild cards in this whole process remain Donald Trump and the Israelis.
It seems to me, Larry, that when you say that, the level of dysfunction is to so I'll listen to somebody in the Trump administration who maybe politically says we got to get the hell out of here because we got, this is killing us, right?
Mhm.
So let's say they want to get out. And as soon as they start talking about it, Lindsey Graham, Jack Keane, David Petraeus, all of these complete lunatics start speaking. But I get the feeling that they're aligned with Congress, that even if whatever you come up with, that there's so much dysfunction on the back end that
Right.
there's people that'll just find a way to kill it.
Yeah, and you're right there that it's easy to sit here and blame all this on Donald Trump. But Donald Trump isn't the only one getting money from AIPAC. He's not the only one on the payroll. And in fact, members of Congress are far more vocal on this matter. And so they can force Trump's hand. So Trump doesn't have a lot of flexibility. And that's where I think until the political attitudes change, and the only way those change is you got to get Israel out of U.S. politics. And frankly, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
I was talking with Dr. Jim Kavanaugh the other day, and I said, if we don't get this resolved, which we won't, then it's going to wreck our economy, and we can't get it resolved. So, and I think the Iranians know that, and the Iranian situation is we ain't going to get nothing out of them until their economy's wrecked, and it will get wrecked. I think that's where we're heading. I don't think there's any other option right now.
Yeah, actually, no, I agree with you. That I maintain that there is no readily available solution yet, because the United States hasn't experienced the pain, the economic pain that's going to accompany these shortages. I was reading or listening yesterday to Sean Fu. So he's a Chinese commentator, but he was pointing out that what's happened now as a result of the helium shortage. So 44% of the world's helium went silent on February 28th when they closed the Strait of Hormuz. Helium is a critical, essential ingredient in making computer chips. So what's happened now is the manufacture of computer chips is dropped significantly. Well, what happens, and at the same time, the demand for those chips are going up because of the AI data centers. And so the prices are just exploding, and it's creating a bubble. And when that bubble pops, collapses, however you want to describe it, man, it's going to be ugly. And so, we're looking at some real tough times ahead. And the problem is the Trump administration is pretending that that's not going to happen. But what we're going to see is a combination of high inflation and probably double digit. They could get up at least as high as around 18-20% annually. At the same time that a drop off in employment, so people be losing jobs. So it'll be a good double whammy, and that's going to then spill over big time into the November elections. And I don't think Trump will recover from that.
Well, Larry, you said it. A lot of other people. I said a lot of people said it. If Trump attacks Iran, he ends his presidency. And at this point, Donald Trump's presidency is defined by nothing else. There is nothing else, no definitive. Everything else, all the whatever has been forgotten. The only thing people are looking at is this Iran thing, and that will define his presidency. And based on that, I'll say Donald Trump's presidency lasted about 13, 14 months. And then it was over. That was it. I mean, because it'll be defined. I mean, he may be run out of office. He may not be run out of office. But the economic destruction, you can't be president. You can't make a decision and then wreck the economy of your country. And many people look at it and feel that you did it on behalf of another country. Right. You're not going to get back to a point where you're credible as a leader.
Yeah, well, he's in Richard Nixon territory now. They did a public opinion poll the other day, and he shares with Nixon being the most unpopular president at this point in his second term. He's at 63% disapproval, which is huge. And I tell you, that's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And that's what he has He made such an issue in the campaign of not getting us into stupid foreign wars, and then he turns around and does that exactly. This is like that moment when George H.W. Bush said, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and then he sold his soul to Mitch McConnell, or not Mitch McConnell, George Mitchell, who I guess was running the Senate back then for the Democrats. He accepted a tax increase in order to get support for the war in Iraq, and that killed him. When Bill Clinton, wiped the floor with him.
And I think it was a combination, because it was that, and the country went into, if you remember, in 1990, 91, the country went into a nasty recession. So you had that, and you had a recession. Well, that recession, as compared to this, is going to look like a day in the park, because I don't see how we avoided a depression, because the economy was not in good shape already when Trump came in. Inflation was through the roof, and people specifically voted on him for two things. Number one, they said, you have to deal with the prices of cost of living. And he said, yep, yeah, and you have to deal with inflation. He said, okay. And you got to stop these wars. And he said, okay. So that's specifically what he ran on. And he did the opposite in spades. He did the opposite of what he did. I think it's going to have a profound effect on politics overall, and people losing the confidence in the political institutions here in the United States.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It is. I watched an interesting. Is it Brandon Straka? Walk away. Republicans, walk away Democrats. Anyway, he had a debate between the baby boomers, people our age, a little older, and the Generation X, the guys basically that are in their mid 30s, early 40s, and there's profound differences, and our baby, not you and me, but there are others of our cohorts who are just living in a delusional fantasy world, and they refuse to catch up to reality, and they repeat all these. What they've been told repeatedly about Iran's the greatest terrorist state in the world, and they're a bunch of religious fanatics, and they hate us for our freedom and all that crap. And so when you got a population that believes that, then they willingly go along with stupid government policies. And it is it's hurting America. They're hurting America big time, and frankly, I don't know if we can recover from this.
Not for the foreseeable future, especially economically. I think that whatever comes out on the other side of this mess looks different. You know what I mean? That where America is, when I look at the blatant disrespect for the Constitution. I think when I look at the economic disaster, when I look at the political disaster, I think that whatever America after this next political, what happened with Thomas Massey? I mean, you can't overlook that. A lot of people looked at that and said, I think it was stolen. And different way it was stolen. Was it stolen because they put the money in? Probably. Was it stolen because they did something awful shifty with the votes? Kind of looks that way too. Politically, how do you recover when the people don't even believe that they can have somebody that represents their beliefs elected anymore?
Correct. Yeah, well, previously, if somebody claimed that Israel exercised too much influence in U.S. domestic politics, you'd be called a conspiracy theorist, an anti-Semite. Well, they've now proved beyond any shadow of doubt that they are, in fact, interfering in ways in our election as a foreign power that if any other country did it, we'd be at war with them. So that was sort of the silver lining of the Massey defeat. It exposed the Zionist influence, and it's eliciting a pushback.
Let me show you something. This is how. Wait a minute, hold on. This is how screwed up Congress is, right? So when it comes to the American people are saying, I hate when this happens. I might have to put that on hold. Let me see. Yep. I don't know why, but sometimes when I go to my other screen disappears. So yeah, that ain't gonna work. All right, well, let's get back to it. My whole other screen disappeared. All of that stuff's gone. Anyway, so let's go to what's happening in Ukraine. There are some things being said now. Apparently, what I'm hearing is I don't know if you've heard this, there may have been some letter or some communication from Zelensky to Trump saying, we need missiles for our air defense system, which the America doesn't have them for their own air defense system. If they had them, they would give them to Israel, not you. Your thoughts on the future of Kiev?
Yeah. He might as well sit down and write a letter to Santa Claus asking for a pony. He might get the pony before he's going to get any PAC-3s or any other missiles, air defense systems. U.S. doesn't have anything left to give. That's the reality. So he can ask, but the United States is giving everything it's got to give to the Israel. Israel's the favorite child here. Ukraine has become the redheaded stepchild, as they say.
Yeah, I think at this point, and now the people are talking about when the Russians attack. What do you think? There are those saying that the Russians it's going to be, taking the gloves off. Also, I've heard some people from inside Russia recently saying, well, I don't know if they might be walking that back a little bit. And I think there are people that think the Russians had planned, once they got enough Oreshniks together and once the battlefield was softened up the way they wanted, that they were going to do this anyway. What are your thoughts on the upcoming strikes? What do you think they look like? Where do you think the directions this thing is going?
Yeah, well, I think Russia through Sergei Lavrov the other day, in warning foreign diplomats to get out of Kyiv. I don't think that was an idle threat. It was Russia warning them that there will be an attack coming. Now, when I frankly thought Russia would be doing it by now. And let me put it this way. If Russia doesn't do it within the next 5 days, they're blowing their credibility. And I don't think that they're going to play that game. I think they're absolutely credible on this account. So that's where this war will take a decided change, because once they launch that attack, it's going to end up destroying key military and political intelligence decision-making centers in Kyiv, and I think when that happens, this war is going to be approaching the end. It's not going to drag on as it has been.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're going to make it. I don't think very soon Kyiv will be able to function as a capital city anymore. That it's going to be a crippled city.
Yeah, well, and the Russians are preparing it. I think part of the reason they issued this warning to evacuate is they do intend to take it, and they're going to attack from Belarus and from Sumy, and they will be captured probably sooner than many anticipate as possible.
Yeah. I think you're right. I don't know, but I think the Russians are looking at it saying, their normal way of war is fighting is slow, and I think they were moving slow, but I think they've decided they've got to really make a point to not just to Ukraine, but I think they got to make a point to the Europeans, because the Europeans seems to have lost their minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they're making threats that they can't follow up on. They're pretending that they're a military power, and they're not anymore. Yeah, they were one time in the past, but that's a distant past now. And I think one of the reasons that Russians avoided doing this. And we talked about this the other night when you had Andre and Scott and I on, that heretofore, Russia, I think, was concerned that if it launched these attacks in Kyiv and it killed U.S. or German or French or British diplomats or intelligence personnel or military personnel, that that could have created a greater threat that the war would expand. And Russia wasn't ready to expand the war. They wanted more time to build up their arsenal and build up their inventories of critical weapons. Well, they've done that now. And I think that's now why they're willing to make this threat. They're prepared to take on Europe and the United States if necessary. They don't want to, but they're ready to do so now. In 2022, they weren't prepared for that. And that I think explains in part the caution that they've exercised over the years since then to not trigger a bigger crisis that they weren't prepared to finish.
It seems to me that the Russians and the Chinese met, and that afterwards, I'll put it like this. I think afterwards, recently, I was reading an article in TASS where the Russians were talking about Japan having these Typhoon missile launchers, how destabilizing that was to the region. And we know, at least I suspect, we heard reports that one of the things that Xi really lit into Trump about was the rearmament of Japan. So right. You've got to look at China and Russia, who together, 50 million people or more, right. Looking at Japan, looking at Germany, and saying to themselves, we got to be prepared to move, to move sooner rather than later.
Yeah. They the combination of Russia and China right now, as you said, that we go back and look at the killed in action or the deaths in World War II. Those two countries accounted for 70% of the deaths. So they're better positioned than anybody to talk about the costs of war, and so that's why they're not going to be rash, brash, careless, and launching into one of these. But they also know that they can't sit back and wait to see what happens, or to continue to absorb blows and attacks, because particularly the Western Europeans, they mistake Russian patience for weakness, and so I think it's incumbent upon the Russians to, wake up, send the message, and this is why you've had Sergei Karaganov, among others, talking about using nuclear weapons. So it is, I think this is not just idle talk. This is a serious situation.
Well, and you have to think about it. And the Russians have said this: look, there's 20 or 30, however many countries it is here. And whatever the case, if we've got to fight all of Europe, then it's going to be very serious. And you know what I mean? I think if Europe, and I put it like this recently: the Europeans have a plan, and their plan is in 2029 or 2030, we will go to war with Russia, and we will then defeat Russia. Okay, I don't think you can do that. But if you were successful, Russia would nuke you and kill every one of you.
Right.
Imagine a plan that politicians that have a plan, and if that plan is successful, they will die, and everyone in one of their countries will die. If their plan is successful, they all die. Right. That ain't my idea of a successful plan, Larry.
Yeah, you wonder. not a lot of deep thinking going into this. This is pure emotion.
It seems to me. Did you hear about the what was it, Mearsheimer and the other guy versus Victoria Nuland?
Yeah.
Did you see any of that?
I watched it.
So for those of us, I didn't see it. What did you? What happened in there? What did you get from that debate?
I didn't realize how stupid Mike Pompeo is. I really thought he was had more intelligence than what he demonstrated. The entire premise of this debate was on John Quincy Adams' speech to Congress. I think it was in 1823, in which he said, the United States is not looking to go abroad to destroy monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And so the entire premise of this is resolved that the United States should not be in the game of going abroad to destroy monsters. And John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt took the position that, yeah, that's right. We have no business doing that. And Newland and Pompeo were insisting, oh my God, there are monsters everywhere. Everybody's a monster but us. And, as I wrote John afterwards and just said, I would have challenged the very premise of the quote or the claim, because a monster, by definition, is an imaginary being. And so what, in a way that John Quincy Adams was talking about, we shouldn't be dreaming up imaginary enemies that we are then going to go forward to destroy. And as part of that, Pompeo went off on a tirade about the Hezbollah being monsters who have killed thousands of Israelis. So I said, I don't think that's right. So I looked it up. And so, I asked both Claude, which is Anthropic, and Grok the same question. How many Israelis have been killed by Hezbollah since 1982, when Hezbollah was formed? Answer was like 852. That's not many. And when you then ask the question, how many Palestinians have the Israelis killed since 1982? The number is at a minimum 92,000 plus. Now, the reason I say at a minimum, I went with the number that the Israeli Defense Force uses and has accepted, of around 73,000. And then on top of that, another 20,000 were killed. Now, if you ask the actual number, I think it's well over 100,000. The point of this is that the ratio of dead, who's killed the most, Israel, for every dead Israeli, the Israelis have killed 100 Palestinians. That's roughly the ratio. So I asked, so who's the real monster here? It ain't Hezbollah. If your definition of monster are those that kill civilians in large numbers. So that was the Mearsheimer and Walt won the debate. But the picture that emerged was of both for Pompeo is the voice of the neocons. He wants to go out and destroy the world, and he lives in a fantasy world where he doesn't actually acknowledge the limitations of the United States and what we failed to do and failed to accomplish in the course of our military adventures over the last 66 years.
It's interesting thing you talked that you of the things to mention. You mentioned this fantasy world acknowledges the limits of power, because the debate over what the U.S. should do or what Trump should do next or what deal he should or shouldn't take is the debate is founded in that dysfunction. Because what we hear, I heard, when Trump said they're going to get a deal, and Lindsey Graham and some other people were doing their usual. We've got to do this, and they've got to do this, and then we've got to tell them this, and we won't accept unless they do that. But that presupposes that we have the ability to impose our will upon them.
Right.
And it ignores the fact that we tried already and lost the war. You get in a fight with a guy, he kicks your ass, and then you say, I'm going to go back and take that guy's lunch money. You've already lost the fight. That's the thing. It's living in a fantasy world. So when we get back to getting a deal, how you gonna get a deal with somebody who lives in a magical fantasy world?
Well, and that's where you get to the details. And you look at what are Iran's demands. Iran's demands are very clear. Sanction relief, immediate, not to be postponed, not to be delivered at some point in the future. Return of frozen assets, money that the United States has been sitting on for 47 years. The end of the war in Lebanon and against the Palestinian people, not promised in the future. End it now, stop it, and acknowledgement that Iran with Oman has control of the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah, and I think, as we mentioned earlier, just listen to Scott Besson. He's not willing to do that. He rejects that. So that's why I said there's no agreement here, despite what Axios and others are claiming. Fox News said, no, they're on the verge of signing an agreement. No, they're not. They're not anywhere close.
Well, and so I guess we could put it this way. Getting a deal would require that the neocons live in the real world.
Yes.
They would accept the limits of power. I mean, rather forget what's in the deal. In order to get a deal, they have to accept that Iran can have red lines. They won't accept that. That we can't force Iran to do anything. They'd have to accept that. And that there will be a high price to pay if we don't accept those realities. And that will be a destroyed U.S. economy and maybe possibly, quite possibly, but it may be even likely, a severe worldwide recession or depression. They just can't do this forever and not pay a price.
Right. Well, and that's, that's why I think we have continued to do things like these. We claim that we suffered terribly in Vietnam. No, we didn't. We lost 58,000 people. Sorry, that's nothing. I'm not disrespecting those who died. I'm not trying to insult the families of those who lost loved ones. But be honest, that's about that. That used to be the annual death toll in automobile accidents until they started making seatbelt mandatory. So, we lost the equivalent of 1 year dead from car accidents over a 15, 20 year period. It's sad for those who died, but, we suffered no price. Same thing for Afghanistan, same thing for Iraq. So we suffered minor casualties, not significant losses. The biggest loss we suffered was economic. When we basically bankrupted ourselves in Vietnam, and then what happened in the aftermath of that, Nixon was forced to go off the gold standard. So the U.S. dollar used to be exchangeable for gold, but no longer. And that was a direct consequence of all the debts that we ran up in Vietnam. And what have we done since then? Man, we continue spending like a drunken sailor in Manila on liberty.
Yeah. And now, I hate to say this because I'm an American, but I want America to be better.
Right.
Sometimes, the only way for the gambling addict to get better is to hit rock bottom, is to lose everything. And he runs up his credit cards and his wife kicks him out. And, and he would never stop gambling if he didn't feel the terrible pain of gambling. And so finally he has to do something to deal with that gambling addiction. Sometimes that's the only way.
Right.
Maybe the only way that Americans themselves will say we've had enough is that they feel the pain of our foreign policy.
Yeah, no, I agree. That I think that's been one of the reasons we've been so willing to get involved in new wars, because we don't really pay a cost in loss of human life. If we did, we would have the attitude that the Chinese and Russians do, they're not out actively seeking to get involved with wars. They're seeking to avoid wars because they know what the cost is, and we don't. And yet we always project onto them the level of aggressiveness that is our hallmark, what we do.
Larry, you've been to Russia like as I have. And if you go to Russia and you travel around, even if you're just in Moscow, but if you go wherever, St. Petersburg, anywhere, one of the striking things about Russia is that the pain of World War II exists today. They don't, like, everywhere you go, there's a memorial, there's a museum, there's something that everywhere around where it's in the hearts of the Russian people that we suffered a terrible pain, but there's also a pride that says we overcame and we defeated. But Americans don't have anything to remind them of the horrors of war. And so we just keep repeating the error. So the idea that the Russians want to attack Europe and want to do that again is preposterous.
Well, the closest we had was, I would argue, the Civil War, and the impact of that war on this country lasted about 100 years. If you think about it, and I'm sure when you growing up around the same time as I was, Memorial Day used to be called Decoration Day.
Yeah.
And it was a time when you, with your family, you'd go out and visit the graves of your grandmother, your grandfather, great grandmother, great grandfather. And that whole holiday was established in the aftermath of the Civil War for the express purpose of acknowledging the graves of the deceased, both Confederate and Yankee. And it wasn't until 1968 that they finally designated it as Memorial Day and designated the holiday as the last Sunday in May. So that's why it's a rotating day, because originally it was established for May 30th, but then they turned it into last Sunday in May, so you get a 3-day weekend out of it. But still, in that was the largest loss of life we acknowledged. The 600,000. World War II, World War I carried a death toll of I think it was over 120,000, and that was but the majority of those were not combat casualties. They died from the flu.
Yeah, the Spanish flu. That's right.
Then we get to World War II. Total deaths were around 470,000, but of those, like 180,000 died in the European theater, 110,000 died in the Pacific theater, and then the other, like 120,000 died just from accidents and illness, nothing related to combat. So, we come out of it with 470,000 dead for the entirety of the war against Japan, war against the Nazis. And the Russians lost over 800,000 in just the Battle of Stalingrad, one battle. So again, we have no appreciation of the scale and the differences. And so that's, and in these negotiations right now with Iran, again, we failed to take into account that the current Iranian leadership, Pezeshkian, the president, Arachi, the foreign minister, Ghalibaf, the head of the legislator, Ayatollah Khamenei, the religious leader, all four of those guys, they're combat veterans. They're combat veterans from a war in which close to 200,000 Iranians were killed. And killed by what? Well, a large number killed by poison gas and chemical nerve agents supplied by the United States. So they have that in mind. That's still a living reality for them. That was their experience when they were in their teens and 20s. And so now they're adults and they're, so in their dealings with the United States, that's always in the back of their minds.
One of the things I think, Larry, now particularly is we have, and we've got a leadership, an elite class, a political class that's all for war. Yay, let's go. One of the things I think is they're tearing the U.S. military to shreds.
Yeah.
The people in the military, you got people saying, when my tour is up, I'm out. You got a lot of people saying, I'm not going to join the military to go fight for Israel. You've got, they've got like these, the Lindsey Grahams who ain't never going to fight anywhere saying, let's go.